Hello, beautiful friends. It's so wonderful to be here with you on this sacred day where we once again tap into the depth and even deeper and higher and vaster into the depth and vastness of the divine self that we are. The divine self is very different from the personality self, and I think that is quite clear from what we share here and how wonderful that we have tools to recover, uncover, remember, discover that part of us that is the divine self. And so today I was looking at all the different quotes from all the different mystics who embodied the light of the divine self. Many of them were born that way, but also many of them meditated their way back into the divine self. And so this was a mantra that, for example, Ananda Mayi Ma, she loved it the most. And it was the mantra, the salutation to the supreme indwelling Lord, which is the divine light within us, which is the light of the divine self. And so we're gonna go on a journey. And before we do so, I wanted to mention something that I came across yesterday. So in 2024, a very small group of us was invited to meet with the Kogi from Colombia, the Aboriginal or native people that live in today's Colombia. They believe themselves that they are Atlanteans and that they are pre-Columbian, obviously. And so in their knowledge, they work every day with the great divine mother. They call her the great mother, and in their language that they use, they call her Aluna. And I know that here on the call, sometimes we have some of you called Aluna, so I assume you know your name according to the Kogi, the great mother. And the Kogi have mamos, and the mamos are the mystics, similar to Don Umberto. And the mamos listen to the earth. They believe that the earth is obviously a sentient being and that she has a soul, and that only she can tell us what is her next desire, what is her next trajectory, what are her needs, what are her wishes, and what we can do for her, how we can assist her. And so they say that we are in a time of great purification. So when we met with the Kogi in 2024, that was also just before we started to work with Don Umberto, and Don Umberto came together with the Kogi. So the Kogi, the mamos, the priests, the mystics, they say we are going through a big time of purification and that 2026 will be a big threshold and that we need to do as much as we can for the mother. Not only the mother that we here call the Mother Earth, but also the great cosmic mother. And so I wanted to dedicate every call, of course, because deep down, every call that we do here is dedicated to the Great Mother, whether we speak about her or not, because she's in all creation. And so it was very interesting, the video that I watched with the mamos. They were saying it's important to sing songs to Divine Mother, to sing, go outside in nature, and just spontaneously, whatever comes through you, sing a song. So I was very tired after our call last night. I finally got some sleep last night for the first time since going to Egypt. And so I was just going outside and I thought, I'll do what they say. And so I stepped barefoot. It was dark. The stars were shining and I stepped outside. And I just sang a little song. I looked up the sky and I said, Divine Mother, I love you. And I sang it. And I adore you. So it was a little song. I love you, Divine Mother. I adore you, Divine Mother. As simple as that. And in that moment, something that I've never seen in my life happened. I don't have a picture of it. I didn't have a camera to capture it. But suddenly a bright light, the size of kind of like a small sun on the dark sky, lit up. And then again, it disappeared. And to me, this was so mind-blowing. So I called my husband and I tried to sing the song again. Nothing happened. But I want to say, to be a witness to a miracle, it's always, of course, so incredibly inspiring, motivating to keep going, to keep being of service. And so maybe today, tonight, when you step outside with your bare feet, try it. Sing a song from the bottom of your heart, even if you're tired. And the response was just unbelievable. I've never actually seen anything like it ever. And so, what inspired me, of course, as it inspires all of us here, is to keep offering our love every day to Divine Mother through any of her bodies, whether it is planet Earth, trees, animals, plants, rocks, the sky, the sun, the cosmos, the universe, the galaxy. It's all one great cosmic mother. And so, once upon a time, Divine Mother showed me an image which actually makes so much sense when it comes to the importance that each one of us plays in this world. She showed me creation made of, let's say, little particles, little lights that we are, each one of us being the light of God, and each one of us being a unique expression. And so she showed me an image in which everything was created from like building blocks. And each one of us was one building block of creation. And even though a small building block of creation, also an important building block of creation. Just imagine if creation was made of Lego pieces and one piece was missing. That one piece has a place in creation. And so this is what she showed me, that in her body, we all are her building blocks. And if one would be missing, creation would not be complete. And I remember there was an invocation with Patricia Cota Robles that I made a video for. And I remember in that video, in the invocation, it said how important each one of us is within creation. And that we should never feel that we don't matter or that we don't play an important role or have a purpose, and that each one of us has that purpose, whatever that is, we embody it. And since today we dedicate to the divine self, each one of us being that building block of creation, just imagine how important it is, each one of us having that place. So we want to go deeper into the divine self. So yesterday I mentioned Milarepa, since Milarepa was mentioned to us the night before. And Milarepa, I don't know much about, but I looked at some quotes and I found several quotes, and it was clear to me that Milarepa, the mystic in Tibet, found his divine self. And so as he said, in the depth of winter, which is... Sorry, I thought I muted my phone. In the depth of winter, which tells me the depth of winter has nothing to do with conditions such as cold or snow. To me, that is when we are only limited by the self, the personality self of the false matrix of samsara, because that is no warmth of the divine. In the depth of winter, I found within an invincible summer. And that invincible summer, again, is the light of the divine self that we all are here in the process of remembering. Today we will look at the Tao Te Ching, we will look at Bhagavad Gita, we will look at Ananda Mayi Ma, we will look at some Yogananda's quotes before we go into meditation, which will be the peace meditation with Orin, which again is also an expression of connecting with the divine self. Within the divine self, there is only peace. Without the divine self, there's always oneness of all things. If we have symbolism for the divine self, we can call the divine self the beginning and the end. Everything is contained within the divine self. The divine self is not only eternal, it is also infinite. And so practicing infinity, an eternal state of consciousness, is one way to attune to the divine self. Within the divine self, it is a little bit like when you have the symbol of the serpent eating her own tail. That is another symbol, a graphic that shows us the divine self. It is the beginning and the end, and all is contained within the divine self. Nothing is missing. So for us human beings, we probably got used to existing as the separate self, the personality self. But this is, as the Kogi say, the time of purification. We are actually purifying our being from our own delusions, personal delusions, and collective delusions. And as we always say, delusion in this world goes very deep, and it is everywhere. And so to be able to actually realize it, one has to be able to first transcend it. It is very, very hard to know the state of our true being when we are fully in delusion. So to be able to know the truth of the divine self, one needs to transcend delusion within and then recognize it without. So here, this is what we are dedicated to, and that is that we are dissolving delusion within and without, and that's why this is the time of purification. We are also purifying the physical body, because at the level of the divine self has a very different relationship with the body than the personality self. The personality self finds either a lot of pleasure in the physical body or also a lot of pain. The personality self finds a lot of fear related to the physical body. And also, it seems very time consuming to be constantly feeding the physical body, to be sleeping as the physical body, to be trying to keep fit as the physical body, to maintain it so that it works. And so you see that is part of the trap of delusion. Big focus on the physicality. That doesn't mean that we should not give enough attention to the physical body, but that is not the original design of creation on planet Earth. The original design of creation was that the body will simply serve, perfectly sustained by life force, and it will not require constant attention, and yet it will be a wonderful vehicle within which the divine self can channel the light into and experience the material universe. So as the divine self is dissolving delusion, only the divine self, through that light, which becomes more and more present, can dissolve illusions, delusions. It cannot be done at the level of illusion itself. And so we need to first transcend the samsara within us and around us. And I believe it is almost impossible at the level of the personality self unless transcendence becomes a possibility. And so we are transcending, not suppressing. You know, suppression never worked. Suppression was suppressing the first three lower chakras, and that usually backfired. So we don't do suppression. We don't do any of that. We transcend. We rise in our own system, higher and higher in our own consciousness. We become more and more aware of the indwelling God within, the indwelling God that is the divine self. The divine self is not fully in us. It could not fit into the human being because it is infinite. But the light of the divine self is what gives us existence. So Milarepa, as one of the many mystics, discovered the mysteries of the divine self. They can never be taught by intellect. That is only intellectual understanding. To know the self, one needs to become the self. And that self is not separate, because the light of the self is always shining upon us, through us, and wants to reach us. And so it is this relationship that we are remembering. The separate self, the personality self, first starts seeking the light of the divine self within. First, it feels like a different aspect, and then we realize the only true self has always been the divine self that is within, but also everywhere, not just in the body. And so every mystic that I came across who got to know the divine self would then speak in a language that, even though it might be different words, you realize that it is all the same, just using different words. For example, in the beginning, nothing comes. In the middle, nothing stays. In the end, nothing goes. This might remind you of the Tao Te Ching. It might remind you of these dichotomies that you will find in all those who found the divine self. It is the nothingness that contains everythingness. And so it's nothing we can comprehend with human intellect, even if we try. The divine self cannot be realized through intellect or knowledge. It actually first dissolves all that we thought we knew, because we only knew it as the separate personality self. The personality self likes to have a lot of knowledge. It likes to show off. It likes to think that it understands it all, and yet it can never understand anything unless it ceases to exist. It is only in the non-existence of the personality self, in complete dissolution, when the divine self can reveal itself. I compare it to real estate. When we have real estate that the personality self is in possession of, the divine self cannot enter, because that room, the space, is taken by delusion. So dissolution of the personality self is really, I would say, the biggest challenge for the human being, because we got so used to the personality self. The Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching is translated, one of the great, it was translated so many times, and I tried to look at different translations, but only the one from Stephen Mitchell, to me, is the real mystical translation. It means not translating words, but actually understanding the divine self. I have never met Stephen Mitchell myself in person. I know some of you have met Stephen Mitchell, but I understand when a mystic can understand. And so from his translation of the Tao Te Ching, I realized that Stephen Mitchell must be a great mystic who understood the true meaning of the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu, some people think that it's a person, and yet Lao Tzu means the ancient child. Now, what is the ancient child? It is the nickname for divine self. When one meets that aspect that already exists within us all now, the divine self, one realizes the divine self is not a person. The divine self is not even a self. It's not a woman, it's not a man, it never began and will never end. Just like Milarepa said, in the beginning nothing comes, in the middle nothing stays, in the end nothing goes. That is a description of the divine self. The divine self, if one were to describe it, would be the ancient child. The energy of the divine self cannot be described by anything because it is everything. The one and only thing that is always missing within the divine self is duality. Duality is absent in the divine self. Delusion doesn't exist without duality. Divine self never had a beginning, will never have an end, and so it doesn't even have linear time that could describe it or define it. When one taps into the energy of the divine self through the techniques that we share here, for example, the teachings of Orin, but also, of course, the practices of Kriya Yoga with Yogananda, then one taps into the light of the divine self. Light is consciousness, but it is not without love. And so when we tap into the divine self, we again cannot limit it to light love, even though that would describe it too. But the energies within the divine self are all the energies of the origin, and in the origin without duality. So we cannot say that fear exists as information in the divine self, because fear has never existed within the divine self. Within the divine self is the perfection of the origin, and that could be described as ancient, because it is eternal. And at the same time, it is completely unburdened by any experience that the human person or the personality self, or if we even existed in other star systems and other planets and other universes, there is no burden. There is complete, one would call it maybe unburdened state, a state that we describe as human beings as innocence. But again, innocence again starts meaning something that we all might misunderstand. But at the level of the divine self, one is like the ancient child with no body. No experience, and yet all experience. And yet all experience contained as the beginning and the end, as the solution to all things without ever having a problem. Isn't that amazing? So I think that should inspire all of us to want to fully experience our own divine self that we are. So the Tao Te Ching, translated by Stephen Mitcher, you will find it is code. So again, cannot be fully understood through just translating words, trying to understand the words, thinking we found the meaning of all life. It is understood through experience. And so the Tao, which is another word for source, as divine mother, as the source of all things, that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So if we can tell it, we are not actually describing the true origin. Because if it can be told, that means it can be described. It means it can be defined. And if it can be defined, it surely is not the eternal, infinite, divine self. Because that cannot be told, cannot be limited by words. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. And so again, this is describing to us the nature of our divine self. Again, from the Tao Te Ching, when people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. That again is showing us that the divine self cannot be within duality, and that duality doesn't exist within the divine self. And so we call it oneness of all life, the one in the middle. And we will reach into that field. Rumi, another great mystic who self-realized the divine self, in complete bliss and celebration of all life, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. And this is the field. And it is the field of the divine self. Sometimes people call this neutrality. I don't like the word personally, because again, it's so misunderstood. The divine self might seem neutral. It is neutral to duality, but it is not neutral in terms of its love. It is massively loving. Nothing else can love more than the divine self. It is not neutral in that way, because love to me is not neutral. Love is this massive, connected, compassionate energy. And so the divine self is massive love without any limitation. The divine self is the pinnacle of our being. It is the highest self, the highest aspect of our experience as a human person. But we also have our soul, which is the intermediary, which is the individualized field of consciousness. The divine self is not individualized in that way. It is infinite and eternal. Again, cannot be described, but we do our best. And so when the Tao Te Ching speaks about the Tao, it is truly the origin of us. It cannot be born, it cannot be dead, it is eternal. And it is the eternal light of consciousness that is love. Today we will do our meditation with peace, and peace is also an energy that can be found within the original self, within the divine self. And so when we attune to peace, in this world we have a lot of drama. In this world, the personality self gets so easily caught. It's like a mouse that runs into a trap again and again and again when it sees a little piece of cheese or whatever it is that we trap mice with. And so the personality self is so easily fooled, and yet it always thinks how smart it is. So the personality self has either what we call a lot of ego, but it also tricks us because it also can be lacking a healthy sense of confidence. And so then the person says, I don't have any self-confidence. And then others would say that person has no ego. And yet it is simply another expression of the personality trickster, the self that either seems to have ego or no ego, and yet both polarities are ego. The divine self doesn't need any sense of confidence or not, because it is pure confidence. It never knew anything else but its own divinity. It doesn't need anything to prove it right or wrong, because it exists beyond right and wrong, just like Rumi said. We are in a human body here. And so, as beings who are in a human body, we need to know how we operate and who is in charge. We always want the divine self to be in charge. The more we can surrender our limited, really unconscious personality self, whether that personality self is very intelligent or not, it doesn't matter. It is all about true wisdom. And wisdom is not knowledge of some words and texts and writings, so quotes. It is experience of the divine self. And it can become so silent that no words will be needed. Right now we use words here for the teaching, but ultimately it is through silence. Not silence of words, not silence of anything else, but complete silence of the lower human mind. That silence allows us to self-realize the ultimate true self. And so going to our Uncle Jesus, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So I don't know if that's a good translation or not. It sounds I don't know if Jesus actually said these words exactly like this, but we'll work with this. What does it say? It says that within us is something so beautiful that we could describe it as heaven. Again, the personality self, of course, has a visual. When we die, we go to heaven. Heaven is all wonderful. But again, that's just an illusion. And it is something that the personality self adopted through culture. But within us, there is that light of the divine self, and it can become very, very fulfilling. It can fill us up. It can fill up the real estate that we are. It can fill our consciousness. It can be who we become. It can be who we operate from as our own, no longer limited personality self, but now the divine self. Inspired by the I am, to be an instrument, to be available, to have no agenda, to have no goals, to be completely present like a small child. Again, if you have small kids in your life, whether it is kids or grandkids, study their behavior when they are pre-culture, when they still have the light of the divine self moving through them freely. How do they experience life? How do they think, if they do think at all? What happens when a child is feeling discomfort? Do they think in terms of duality, or are they present for whatever is, whether it is comfortable, uncomfortable, and they express it physically, but they don't go into the dualistic mind. They don't go into the seeking of conditions. It's very fascinating. And so in that state, Jesus here is actually describing the state of the divine self, the one who is completely free from duality. And in that moment, in that state of being, we tap into what we would call heaven, whether it is kingdom or queendom or both. And it is not somewhere above the clouds, but it actually is self-realized through the axis that runs through the spine and the heart. And it feels like heaven within. That is why the mystics find that once they cut through the layers of delusion from the divine self, they then self-realize heaven within, and they can be in the world. Here you see a picture, someone who is in the world, but now, since the light of the divine self is cutting through the delusion, they are connected to the one power. Now they can be in this world of delusion, but they are not of the world. And what makes them not of the world is that self-realization of that eternal power within. So as we work with Orin, Orin has so many wonderful tools. And I mentioned that we will be offering a free online retreat for 7 days in December. And it will be offered through Circle. It simply is that Circle is a wonderful platform that we use for our online community, where it's easy to share, easy to communicate, easy to schedule calls, easy to post. So I'm simply choosing to do it for the purpose of ease, and also as a thank you to our community for this belonging, for this empowering of the big mission, which at the beginning the Kogi mentioned is service to the Great Mother. And so we will be working with some tools with Orin and deepening again our experience of the divine self, not only through meditations with Orin, but also all the different practices that it takes. It takes some rearranging of our energies. Because if it didn't take rearranging, then we would simply be just like a person who's trying to find comfort within delusion by making their home comfortable. We don't want that. We want a complete restructuring so that the consciousness of the divine self can flow through us. And so Orin has many different, I would also call it invocations to the divine self, and this is one of the very, very powerful ones. O divine self that I am, assist me. I cannot do it on my own. I, the personality. And so, yes, the personality cannot do it on their own. The inspiration comes from the divine self. It cannot come from the lower human mind. Again, it would be like tapping in the delusion and trying to find a solution in the delusion. It cannot be found in the delusion itself. We will take a look at a few more quotes and then we'll go into meditation. The other wonderful translation of the Bhagavad Gita that Stephen Mitchell did, and that is, again, through the depth of his own divine self. I truly believe one cannot translate these texts without being one with the divine self. And so you will recognize, you can get this as an audio book if you like to listen to books. The same with the Tao Te Ching, and listen again and again and again. Allow it to move through you. And so we will find the same things. Only the man who is unmoved, now this is important in terms of duality, only the man who is unmoved by any sensations, the wise man, indifferent to pleasure, to pain, is fit for becoming deathless. So again, when we look at it as the divine self description, the divine self is the deathless self. The trapped in the delusion is the lower human personality self. The lower human personality self is always moved by sensations. And it's always preferring pleasure to pain. But if we want to connect with the divine self, it leads us to the indifference. And that is where we have access to the deathless self with a capital S. Probably in this world, we will all probably leave the physical body at some point. And many people, when they are leaving the physical body, they are still filled with the energies of the personality self. that will only take them to the next expanded state that will be predetermined by their personality energies. They don't go away the moment we leave the body. And so heaven is not the same for everyone. And that's just, using the metaphors that we have in this world. The one thing that we want to focus on when we are ready to leave the physical body is always the divine self. Nothing else. Keeping our attention on the divine self, which is deathless, which is infinite, which is eternal. And that can take us into a much more expanded state of being than the limited self that thinks about family, thinks about the things they did and didn't do in this world. Those are not the thoughts we want to have, even though it seems natural that we would. So, what is the freedom? Freedom is union with the deathless. The self is the essence of all things. Again, this is from the Bhagavad Gita. And so, what is found within the eternal self is complete freedom. And that is when the mystic said, I am so free, I could even accept bondage now, and it wouldn't matter to them. This is real freedom. Freedom is only to be found in that deathless, eternal, infinite light and love and peace of the divine self. And so here the mystics in the Bhagavad Gita again, it is the self with a capital S is the essence of all things. And I mentioned the divine self is not at all indifferent to the suffering of anyone. It is the most compassionate self. It is the one and only self that is fully equipped to be an instrument of God. That's why I don't want to call it neutrality, because people sometimes ignore the suffering of others, thinking how advanced they are. And yet, when it comes to their own suffering, they are again swallowed by their own pain. And so the divine self is the solution to all things. If everyone was connected to the divine self fully and completely, suffering, pain, unconsciousness would cease to exist together with all the conditions created by unconsciousness of humanity. And so it is the solution to all the good things. It is the solution to all situations within humanity and our world. That's why I believe that is the most important self-realization of the true self. And so he who sees that all actions are performed by nature alone, and thus that the self, you see the self with a small s, is not the doer, that man or woman, of course, sees truly. And so what is that nature? That nature is the Tao. It is the flow. It's the river of life. It is the inspiration. And that is how things get done. Through that self, through inspiration, through divine idea, through action without attachment. That all is the self with a capital S. The small self ceases to exist because the small self is very different. The small self has goals. The small self thinks about what's next, what could happen, what might happen, might not happen, what happened in the past. The small self is constantly comparing something to something else. It is always trapped in duality. It has attachments to outcomes. It doesn't like certain conditions, but it also prefers other conditions. It always is trapped by duality. And so to be one with the one who can be with nature, it is to be in surrender. The master acts without doing anything. This is again from the Tao Te Ching. And then we will go into our meditation. So it is good to first understand, or at least try to understand, what the divine self is like. and then to, of course, do all the inner rearranging so that the divine self can become our consciousness. Our personality self is our unconsciousness. Our personality self is also our subconsciousness. But the one and only consciousness that we are or have access to is the consciousness of the divine self. The personality self is actually always unconscious because it is attached to the personality. Only when we reopen our channels to the divine self, we become truly conscious. So as long as we are trapped by delusion, trapped by duality, we are not conscious, because consciousness is free from duality, and consciousness is the light that dispels delusion. The master acts without doing anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear, she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. That again is a wonderful description from the Tao Te Ching, similar to what Milarepa said. There is a complete non-attachment, and yet that non-attachment also, again, is deeply involved. It is deeply involved in actually being an instrument. It's not lazy, and it is not neutral to the suffering of anyone and anything. It is always deeply involved and yet not fooled or trapped by the delusion. It sees through all things. It is a little bit like Babaji, seeing the suffering of all humankind, whether they're doing well or not. Whether someone is doing well or not within delusion actually doesn't matter, because it always is delusion. Conditions are not at all what the divine self sees as success or not. The divine self doesn't look at our world of delusion and say, these people found comfort in the delusion, they are doing great. The divine self sees both as suffering. Trapped by delusion, it is suffering, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. And so Babaji, as you know, another embodiment of the great divine self, the great avatar, would say, I will remain in this world, even though it's a non-physical, physical state of being, in the eternal self, and I will make sure that everyone will be liberated. That shows us how the divine self is deeply compassionate, deeply caring, not liberating someone from suffering because conditions are bad, but liberating beings from delusion, because that delusion is what blinds 8.5 billion people in this world. And so that's the little bit of the dichotomies of the divine self. And finally, I wanted to look at Ananda Mayi Ma just as the representation of the divine feminine, someone who was born as the divine self and never developed a personality self and always remained free. It's important to look at lives of the great ones and how they experience the conditions of duality and delusion. And did they in any way feel affected by them? And of course they didn't, because that's the whole point, to be unaffected by what we would call good and bad conditions, because they see them as one. They see beyond duality, so they don't see the good and the bad. And yet they are here to serve all, those who are so-called doing well in delusion, and those who are so-called not doing well in delusion. They serve them both equally, seeing everything as delusion. And so Ananda Mayi Ma, she lived an extraordinary life of the divine self being in a physical body, where she described herself as someone who never changed. Her consciousness was always the same. Whether she was a small girl, young woman, older lady, she always had the same consciousness. And some of the quotes about the self. The self alone is real. All else is unreal. And we saw that before. The delusion means if we look at this reality and we call it real, even though it is unreal, if we have relationship with it where we describe it in terms of duality, in terms of preferences, likes and dislikes, then we are trapped by delusion. And so the only real is the self. The self is ever present. What is needed is that you become aware of it. And so that's what we talked about yesterday. If our awareness is like a balloon, and the balloon is first small, we have small awareness of our own being. First, we are aware of the body, we are aware of our emotions, we are aware of our thoughts, maybe. And then we expand the balloon, and we expand it and keep expanding it, and suddenly we become aware of the divine self as the indwelling God within us. To know thyself, to know the self, is to be the self. That again means that the limited human personality self cannot understand or know the self unless we become that self. And how do we know that we have become the self? Duality ceases to exist in our unconscious mind. We move beyond the likes and dislikes. We move into that state the Bhagavad Gita speaks about and the Tao Te Ching speak about, where we are unaffected by delusion. And it seems impossible, but it only seems impossible to the separate personality self. It is the nature of the true self, because the true self is the light of God, and the light of God is always victorious because it never had a battle to win. It's always been the victorious self with no battle. To be anchored in the self, so be anchored in the self, then whatever comes is seen as divine play. And that's something that we recently received as information in Egypt. To be deeply satisfied with all that is, as is, and yet be constantly available to be an instrument through which the divine self moves so that we can play the character that is needed in this world. That character might be the one who fixes things without seeing them as broken. It might be a character who is helping others without actually seeing a problem. The divine self is not oriented towards problems because it never exists within duality. So you see why then in that emptiness we find everythingness, why there are these divine dichotomies, because they are a different operating system. It is the operating system beyond duality. It is the operating system beyond delusion that we will be getting in touch here with. So just to say the dates for the free online retreat that will be offered through Circle, it will be December 16, 17, 18. Then we'll take a little break for the holidays and the solstice. And then again, 27, 28, 29, 30. So I'll post it in Circle as well. And our goal will be to move deeper and deeper and deeper, which also means higher and higher and higher and vaster and vaster and vaster into the light and consciousness of the unlimited divine self. For that, we will today use the peace meditation. We not only, of course, it is important to be peaceful, which we can only find peace in the divine self, but we can always. So Circle is a platform which is not free for me to run. So we require a very small, I would call it, contribution to simply running the platform. It's only $12 a month. And for our admin work, which is a lot of work. And so it will be offered free in Circle, since Circle is an amazing platform that has all the tools that allow us to very easily hop on, produce content, share content, announce content, do calls. And so it will be limited to Circle. especially because of the travel that we are maybe all of us doing in December, so that we can be on the go. So for me, it's like an on the go, easy to do. So peace meditation you will find in on Orin and DaBen. So I'm just gonna go and you will find it for free. Many of these tools are free. So again, even if you don't want to spend any money on anything, which of course in this world we still use monetary currency. Even if you don't want to spend any money on anything, you will find all these meditations for free on Orin and DaBen. So if you go to Orin and DaBen and you look for free on our website and you go to Orin's meditation room, with just those tools, you will have eventually great access to your own divine self. So yesterday we did a meditation which was called it was called the New Dawn. And so today we will be doing the peace meditation. So I'll pause recording. Again, it's for free on Ananda Ben. You recognized in this incredible transmission meditation with Orin that it is all about the peace of the divine self. Within the divine self, there is no conflict. And yet, if one is inspired by the divine self, they might even become a warrior. And they might even fight a battle, but not because of duality. The divine self has no cultural norms, and it breaks up all delusions of expectations. When the little personality self has a lot of delusion, it expects others to be a certain way, and so the divine self comes in as the avatar that we know as Lao Tzu, Dattatreya, and many others. And they start acting in a way that breaks the delusion of expectation. It can even lead to disappointment because the divine self likes to break delusion so deeply. It might even seem to disappoint others. It cannot be socialized or limited by social norms. It exists beyond culture and any establishments in our social structures. It has no conventions, and it is so extraordinary. We could not even have a little conversation with the divine self to chat about this world, because this world is not real to the divine self. If we are like a vessel, so let's say a glass, a clear glass, then the limited delusion self, the personality self, is like dirty water with a lot of sediment just hanging low. And for some people in this world, that is the content of their being, the murky water of delusion. The divine self is the clearest, clean water. And so for that to be who we are, our vessel must be clean and empty. We cannot fake it until we make it when it comes to the divine self. One truly has to do a little bit of rearranging, emptying the vessel, cleaning the walls, the floors, allowing the clarity of the divine self in. Since the divine self exists beyond duality, it also exists beyond conditions. It doesn't consider anything good and bad. And the response would always be maybe, maybe, because it knows the world beyond delusion, in which all is one. It doesn't seek conditions in this world to be good or bad. It has no resistance to anything. If the human being resists conditions, that human being is trapped in delusion. The divine self has no preference. It exists beyond preferences, and yet, and this is the dichotomy, it is always filled with complete peace, love, wisdom, abundance, lightness, well-being, and harmony, without duality. When the divine self manifests in a person in this world, They seem to be detached and yet completely engaged whenever the divine is asking that, but also completely in non-action if the divine does not require any action. It is always available to action and non-action. They simply arise in them. The divine self doesn't know any stress. There is nothing to be stressed about, not even ill health, not even tragedies. And yet the divine self is deeply caring and compassionate. The divine self doesn't see tragedy as real, but it also doesn't see great success and victory as real. They are equally unreal. And so it is.